am a woman from a small town in Mexico. I work in a local store and live with my family. I always dreamt of speaking English. It's like a magical language to me, opening doors to new opportunities and adventures. One day, I decided to take action. I went to the community center where they offer English classes for beginners. That's where I met Mrs. Smith, my English teacher. "Hello, I'm Mrs. Smith," she said with a warm smile. "What's your name?" "I'm Elena," I replied shyly. "I'm so glad you're here to learn English," Mrs. Smith said encouragingly. "It's a wonderful language that can change your life." I felt excited and nervous at the same time. Learning English seemed like a big challenge, but I was determined to succeed. I had many reasons for wanting to learn English. One of the main reasons was my dream of traveling to the United States. I wanted to explore new places, meet new people, and experience different cultures. English would be my key to making this dream come true. Another reason was my job at the local store. We often had tourists visiting from English-speaking countries, and I struggled to communicate with them. I felt frustrated and embarrassed when I couldn't understand or respond to their questions. However, my biggest motivation came from within. I wanted to prove to myself and to others that I could learn a new language. I wanted to break free from my comfort zone and challenge myself to become better. But it wasn't easy. I faced many challenges in my journey to learn English. One of the biggest challenges was my lack of confidence. I often doubted my ability to learn and speak the language fluently. I worried about making mistakes and sounding foolish. Communication was another hurdle. English pronunciation was difficult for me, and I struggled to understand native speakers. I felt lost in conversations and often had to ask people to repeat themselves. Despite these challenges, I refused to give up. With determination and perseverance, I continued attending classes with Mrs. Smith, practicing every day and pushing myself to improve. One sunny afternoon, as I walked into the community center for my English class, I saw a familiar face. It was Mrs. Smith, my English teacher. Her warm smile greeted me as I entered the classroom. "Hello, Elena," she exclaimed. "I'm so glad to see you again." I returned her smile nervously. "Hi, Mrs. Smith." As the class began, Mrs. Smith introduced herself to the new students and then turned to me. "Elena, would you like to share why you're learning English?" I hesitated for a moment, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. Finally, I spoke up. "I want to learn English because I dream of traveling and meeting new people. It's important for my job, too, to communicate with tourists." Mrs. Smith nodded, her eyes showing understanding. "That's wonderful, Elena. Learning English will open up so many opportunities for you." After the class, I approached Mrs. Smith with a shy request. Mrs. Smith, could you please teach me how to speak English?" Her eyes lit up with kindness. "Of course, Elena. I'm here to help you learn and improve. Let's schedule some extra practice sessions together." I felt a surge of gratitude and determination. With Mrs. Smith's guidance, I knew I could achieve my goal of speaking English fluently. As Mrs. Smith and I started our extra practice sessions, our relationship began to grow stronger. She was not just my teacher, she became a mentor and a friend. During our lessons, Mrs. Smith focused not only on grammar and vocabulary, but also on building my confidence. She encouraged me to speak up, make mistakes, and learn from them. Her patience and understanding made me feel safe to express myself in English. There were moments of frustration and confusion, but Mrs. Smith never let me give up. She used creative teaching methods like games and role-playing to make learning fun and engaging. I started to see progress in my speaking and understanding of English. One day, we had a breakthrough moment. We were practicing a conversation about ordering food at a restaurant, and I struggled with pronouncing some words correctly. Instead of correcting me immediately, Mrs. Smith smiled and said, "You're doing great, Elena. Let's try it again, and this time focus on the sounds of the words." With her guidance, I pronounced the words better, and I felt a sense of achievement. It was moments like these that motivated me to keep learning and improving. As weeks passed, I became more confident in my English-speaking abilities. I could hold conversations with tourists at my job without feeling nervous. My family and friends noticed my progress and cheered me on, boosting my confidence even more. Through Mrs. Smith's support and encouragement, I not only learned English, but also grew personally. I gained resilience, determination, and a belief in myself that I could achieve anything I set my mind to. One evening, I decided to watch a popular English movie with subtitles. I was excited to test my English skills and see how much I had improved. However, as the movie played, I quickly realized that understanding spoken English was still a challenge for me. I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me. "Why can't I understand?" I thought to myself, frustrated. The next day, I shared my experience with Mrs. Smith during our practice session. "I tried watching a movie in English, but I couldn't understand much," I confessed, feeling disheartened. Mrs. Smith listened attentively, then smiled reassuringly. "It's okay, Elena. Watching movies in English is a great way to improve, but it takes time and practice. Let's work on your listening skills together." We started incorporating listening exercises into our lessons. Mrs. Smith played audio clips of conversations, interviews, and speeches in English. She helped me focus on recognizing words, understanding context, and improving my listening comprehension. One day, while watching another movie in English, I noticed something amazing. I could understand more. The words didn't sound like a blur anymore. They were starting to make sense. I felt a surge of excitement and accomplishment. "Mrs. Smith, I understood what they said," I exclaimed happily during our next session. She smiled proudly. "That's fantastic, Elena. Your hard work and dedication are paying off." From that moment on, I made it a habit to watch movies and series in English regularly. Each time, I noticed improvement in my ability to follow conversations and enjoy the story without relying too much on subtitles. One day, as I sat down to practice English with Mrs. Smith, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. From struggling to form basic sentences to understanding movies and having conversations with confidence, my journey had been challenging yet incredibly rewarding. "Mrs. Smith, I want to thank you for everything you've taught me," I said gratefully. She smiled warmly. "You've worked hard, Elena. I'm proud of how much you've improved." As we continued our session, Mrs. Smith shared valuable tips and tricks for anyone learning English. Practice every day. Consistency is key. Set aside time each day to practice reading, listening, speaking, and writing in English. Use resources. Take advantage of online courses, language apps, and educational websites to supplement your learning. Watch and listen. Watch movies, TV shows, and videos in English. Listen to English songs, podcasts, and audiobooks to improve your listening skills. Speak up. Don't be afraid to speak in English, even if you make mistakes. Practice speaking with native speakers or language partners to gain confidence. Expand vocabulary. Learn new words and phrases every day. Use flashcards, apps, or reading materials to build your vocabulary. Think in English. Try to think, write, and speak in English as much as possible. Immersing yourself in the language helps improve fluency. Be patient and persistent. Learning a language takes time and effort. Stay motivated, stay positive, and don't give up. As Mrs. Smith shared these tips, I realized that learning English was not just about mastering grammar and vocabulary. It was about embracing a new language, culture, and way of thinking. With renewed determination and a wealth of knowledge, I continued my journey to fluency, knowing that each step brought me closer to achieving my dreams.